Hello. My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and welcome to the NFL DFS Saturday stream. We're going to be talking about Week 10 NFL DFS today. We have my cat in the background over there taking a bath. We have another cat over here taking a nap. Then we have Kershaw downstairs, where he's not going to yell at me in the camera. I am a little bit late to opening up this stream, which is annoying, but it's because I had to fix some audio bullshit that was happening. As it turns out, in the last couple weeks, for some reason, my streaming software set my default microphone to my webcam instead of my Yeti, which, as you can tell from previous videos, was fucking terrible. So that's been switched. Hopefully the audio is better today. Yeah, it's really fucking annoying, Zach. I'm not good at that kind of stuff. I'm not good at like that end of the tech stuff. So, but that's been fixed, hopefully. So hopefully things are better this week. It looks like a pretty solid slate, I think. I dove in a little bit. I don't usually do like a first look before I do the stream. Usually the stream is my first look, but today and this week I did decide to take a little bit of a look ahead of time, and it looks like a pretty good slate. There's some kind of weird chalk here and there. People are still playing Bijan Robinson for some stupid fucking idea. He's projected to be like 17% owned chalk. I don't know why people keep doing this to themselves. I mean, I said it last week on stream that Arthur Smith just literally uses lotion in both hands when the fantasy community talks about his usage of Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson. And then I said you should just play Jonnu Smith, who looked like a really good play. And then he was a really fucking good play. And people are, again, it looks like, just deciding to play Bijan Robinson. I mean, I don't have like my build up yet, but let's see. Main screen here. Go ahead and go close up and zoom in a million X here. Yeah, like Joe Mixon projects to be pretty high owned. We'll just sort this by ownership really quick. Joe Mixon projects to be the highest owned on the slate right now. Then Rachaad White. But then like we worked down this list a little bit, and here's fucking Bijan. Like why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? His utility is okay. It's good. But like his expected PPR points is 12.4. This is not something that we really want to be getting onto, man. It just doesn't. It's not something that we want to be doing. So we shouldn't. We just shouldn't be eating that chalk. But if people are going to continue to pay the rake, I'm going to let them. So that's kind of weird chalk. But overall, I think that the stacks and a lot of the other chalk kind of does make sense. We'll talk through all that. Usually what we do is we start with macro concepts. If you've been here before, you know this, but I'm just going to say it for the others. We're going to go through macro stuff first. We're going to talk about like the team level, team totals, stuff like that. Then we're going to talk about some stacks. We're going to talk about individual positions. And then we're going to look at where the chalk is sitting, what chalk looks good, what chalk doesn't. And then we're going to go through the process of kind of figuring out what teams we want to stack and how we want to build out those lineups. It's been a pretty successful way of breaking down the slate over the last couple weeks. So let's continue that. Also, for the drink for tonight, I have coffee again. I did coffee last week instead of wine, and I felt like it gave me a little bit of a boost towards the end of this stream, and I had a pretty good time. So I'm doing coffee. This is a 5-ounce pour from my Nespresso. I don't remember what it was called, but it's 5-ounce pour from the Nespresso. It has my Paydirt spice in it with 3 dabs, and then it has 8 ounces of soy milk, which was mixed in the frother. It's pretty good nighttime nightcap coffee. I drink black coffee typically. Nobody fucking cares about this, but I typically drink black coffee until I have coffee in the afternoon or at night, when I will mix in some soy milk or some oat milk if I'm really feeling crazy. But I'm trying to lose some weight right now, so I really can't do like full fat milk. I can't do full fat. I can't do 2%. I can't do oat milk. Really, my only option is soy milk. And yeah, I'm not a fan of soy milk, Ike. I'm really not. Like, I won't just drink it just because. But in coffee, it's fine. You really only put milk in coffee to even out the acidity anyway. So it accomplishes basically the same shit on that. So whatever. Twitch Mod, thanks you for zooming in. Absolutely. Trying to do my best for you. Let's see. Voice of an Angel. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it. And this is the week. It's not. It's not, James. It's really not. Never is. I mean, what did he do last week? Hold on. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look again here. Oops. All right, let's see. Running backs for Atlanta Falcons. So, Bijan Robinson, last week, 61% of the snaps, 44% of the rushing attempts, 55% of the routes. Targets per route run of 17%. That's in line with the season average. I mean, like, literally everything is in line with the season average. 61%, totally in line. 44%, in line. 55%, even a little bit lower. His route participation was worse last year. Targets, in line. Targets per route run, in line. Long down and distance snaps, in line. 2-minute snaps, in line. Like, everything completely in line for the guy. Nothing pointing us towards Arthur Smith wanting to use him more than he already is. Now, granted, at 6K, this is okay. Like, he's appropriately priced now. That's the thing. Like, if you wanted to use Bijan Robinson now, that's fine. But you shouldn't want to use him when he's like 17% owned. Like, that's too high owned for a player who's appropriately priced. There's a lot of other players that are better plays in terms of the ownership and their usage. So, let's go ahead and set these things up. See, T-Botch coffee, love it, hell yeah. Coffee is the truth. Research, we need the research sheets. We need the contest sims. I might have time to do those today. If I don't, then I'll make sure to talk about them a little bit tomorrow. Stack Finder, always use Stack Finder. Okay, I think that's all we need right now. And I might need this. I don't remember. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the macro stuff. This is updated as of this afternoon. Okay, so overall, highest team total on the slate is Dallas versus New York Giants. Dallas is a 17-point favorite. Just massive, bigly favorites here. It doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence for the overall game total. Like, when you have a team that has a 28 implied team total and the game total is only 39, it's not great. Who knows, though? You know, maybe the Giants come out and maximize their effort. I don't know. It doesn't look good, though. And Dallas is really, really good at punching down. Dallas is not very good against good opponents, but they're great against bad opponents. So Dallas in a spot to kind of just stomp the Giants. Buffalo is the next highest team total at 26.75. Then Cincinnati at 26.5. Detroit, 25.75. Seattle, 25.25. Vegas really doing a lot of heavy lifting here for Seattle. Like, a lot of heavy lifting. I'm going to go actually look and see what Seattle's typical team total is. Really quick. Doop-a-doop-boo. I need my other things up here. Y'all don't need to see that. Y'all don't need to see that. This is all back-end stuff that I can't actually show on stream, but that I use every week just for reasons. Let's see. Seattle's average points scored is 21.38. So 25.25, they're up about 4 points or so on their team total, or on their typical total. Cincinnati, on average, scoring 19.38. Their team total of 26.5 is about a touchdown higher than their season average. Let's see. Detroit, let's compare that. Detroit scores on average 25 points. Their team total is 25.75, so not much there. Let's see. Is there anything else here that's kind of weird in terms of that? I mean, I guess we could say the Giants, but the Giants, no. The Giants are implied for 11 points, and they average 11.22 on the season. Let's see. Cleveland averages 22 on the season, implied for just 15. That's kind of an interesting one. But yeah, it's good. It's good practice or good things to do, good process to go and check and see what the average output is for a team versus what their team total is. It just kind of lets you see a little bit more about how Vegas is viewing their matchup. Whereas if a matchup is really bad, Vegas is going to dock teams based on their team total, based on how many points they average score. Whereas if the matchup is really good, usually they'll boost it up. We're saying that Dallas, their team average point score is 27.5 on the season, and their team total is 28 here. So they expect Dallas to just kind of do what they have been doing. But Cincinnati getting a boost here up against Houston. They think that Cincinnati is in a much better spot. Seattle getting a boost here, about 4 points or so. So those are teams that look a little bit better than what their typical output is. Let's go ahead and take a look at some game totals here. So Detroit and Chargers, best in game environment and team total on the slate, 48.5. Detroit only a 3-point favorite over the Chargers here, so that's probably a game that you're going to want to have a lot of attention to. Houston, Cincinnati at 47 is the second best. And then Denver Buffalo is third best. I don't think Denver Buffalo is actually on the slate. I'm pretty sure they're not on the slate. And then Washington, Seattle, 44.5. Washington, Seattle is really interesting. I really like Washington. I wrote them up over at Fantasy Life as the value stack. I think that they're a pretty solid stack overall. Every single week, their dropbacks are the highest in the projections. No different here. Washington is projected for 43.64 dropbacks, and that's 4 above Carolina, who has the second highest, and they had a high dropback rate up against Chicago, and then Cincinnati, who's at 39. So Washington, I think, is the better side to back here rather than Seattle. Washington they just pass a lot, man. Eric Bieniemy went over there and basically implemented a full-on pass attack, which is sick. It's been really good for the fantasy relevancy of most of the Washington players, even if Sam Howell is a little bit inefficient, right? Let's see. Let's sort by lowest to highest. This fucking Jets-Vegas game, this is going to suck. 36.5. Baltimore, Cleveland, really low on 38 between two defensive-minded teams. Chicago, Carolina, that game was a fucking barn burner. Pittsburgh, Green Bay, this game looks bad, 38.5 as well. And then, yeah, this Dallas, New York Giants. This is a spot probably where we should be focusing on Tony Pollard if other people are not. So what does his ownership look like? Because if people are going to be off of Tony Pollard this week, this is the week to use him. We really like to use running backs that are on teams that are going to score a lot of points. We like to use running backs who have a really good usage, and we like to use running backs who are usually home favorites, right? I'm pretty sure that Tony Pollard is basically like the nuts play this week. He projects for 17.75 ownership. But like when you look at kind of where he is in the pricing, and after how hard he burned people the last couple weeks, I think he's going to come in under this. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Tony Pollard comes in at like 10 to 15% owned instead, rather than this 17%. I think that that's probably a pretty good spot to be on, especially if people are going to be paying for Joe Mixon or Rachaad White. Like, if people want to pay down at running back or play Christian McCaffrey, I think this 7K range is just going to be a dead zone. People aren't really going to play Tony Pollard much. People really aren't going to play much Kenneth Walker, and they shouldn't. Nobody's going to play Austin Eckler at 8,400. We can talk about Aaron Jones in a second. I'm fine with that. But yeah, Tony Pollard, I think, really, really good spot here. Let's sort some things here. Most passing touchdown expectation is Buffalo against Denver, and then Cincinnati versus Houston, and then Dallas against the Giants. Pretty interesting that Dallas's pass touchdown expectation is so much higher than their rush touchdown expectation. Mostly comes from their splits in the red zone, I think. Lowest pass touchdown expectation is the Giants, obviously, and then Cleveland, Jets, Tennessee. Rushing touchdowns, the highest is Detroit up against Chargers. One thing that I noticed is that David Montgomery is basically getting no ownership. I think I saw him projected for like 7% ownership or something, which is something we should probably exploit. He's been really, really, really good. Even though he's gotten injured a couple times, he's been terrific in terms of his usage, and I'll show that a little bit later, but really like Dave Montgomery. That's a note worth having. And then Baltimore, and then San Francisco, and then Indianapolis. Baltimore, another spot. There's going to be some questions, I think, on the usage for Keaton Johnson. But like Gus Edwards, 19% of the snaps last week. Justice Hill, 64%. J.K. Dobbins. Keaton Mitchell only had 17% of the snaps this week, but he did have 24% of the rushing attempts. And that's notable. Like, only 17% of the snaps, but eating up 24% of the rushing attempts. Like, Justice Hill had 4 times as many snaps and only had 10% more of the rushing attempts. So that's worth saying. His expected fantasy points, Keaton Mitchell, that said, is like 15 or something. So as a super boomer bust play, Keaton Mitchell might make a lot of sense, especially if they want to get him more involved. They really don't want to just count on Gus Edwards. And Justice Hill really isn't very good. So that's a pretty interesting one, I think. And then we'll go to, let's see, total touchdowns in games. Buffalo, Detroit, Dallas. Detroit is going to look really, really good overall. But we'll see that as we go through into the rest of the stacks. So overall from that, game environments, not super great. We don't have any team totals over 50. The highest team total on the slate goes to Dallas, which they are up against the Giants, who just suck dick. So that one, I mean, I think that people will not be on Dallas stacks. I'm not sure how people are going to approach Dallas. Like, people should be on Tony Pollard by a lot. Tony Pollard should be like 25% on in this spot. This is the spot where Tony Pollard should be chalk. But I don't think that people are going to go there. I think that people are going to use the Cowboys defense, and they probably should, unfortunately. The Cowboys defense, I think, is going to be really, really popular in this spot. But I don't know how people are going to go about their offense. When we look at ownership, we'll close up here for a second again. Let's go ahead and take a look at the overall range of outcomes and look at just Dallas. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, Pollard looks like he projects as the heaviest chalk. And CeeDee Lamb only at 12%. Jake Ferguson only 11%. Dak Prescott at 9%. Like, it kind of seems worthwhile saying that, like, Dallas should have a lot higher ownership than this. And we'll see how things look tomorrow. Because I'm sure that CeeDee Lamb is going to bump up a little bit. I am hoping not, but I think that Tony Pollard should jump up a bit. If Tony Pollard isn't 20-25% owned this week, like, what the fuck are people doing? But Jake Ferguson at 10%, that's a great play. CeeDee Lamb at 12%, he was 40% owned last week. Like, that's a great play. And he was 8,200 last week. So for $300 more against an absolutely inept defense, we should like that. But other than that, other than Detroit, team totals, Cincinnati, Detroit, Seattle, I think there's going to be a lot of ownership on Detroit. I think there's going to be a lot of ownership on Cincinnati, especially because T. Higgins is out. And it's a cost-effective stack with a team with a high pass rate. So Cincinnati going to be good chalk. Detroit going to be good chalk. I think I'm most interested to see how Dallas shakes out in terms of ownership. Secondary stuff. The Chargers always make for a good stack. Keenan Allen was not getting enough ownership when I looked earlier today. We'll talk about that as well. And then we'll look a little bit more at the stacks here in a second so that we can see what the prices are on these stacks versus the team totals. You want to talk about Aaron Jones? Oh, it's hilarious that you got auto-deleted. That's funny. You want to talk about Aaron Jones, Washington stack with CMC Pollard? Yeah, I'm really into that. I think the Washington stacks are going to be hot, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. But Washington stacks make a lot of sense. You love Joe Mixon. I think everybody does. He's the highest owned. He's projected to be the highest owned player, right? Yeah, I think so. And Mixon, I mean, his role has been good. 75% of the snaps, 67% of the rushing attempts last week. I mean, his rushing attempts are down a little bit, which is a bummer. But the routes are good. Targets are good. Targets per route run is fine. Like, he's been fine. He gets you anywhere between like 14 and 20 fantasy points every week, but he just doesn't do much more than that, And I think that's probably a touchdown thing. But let's go ahead and just jump into the stack stuff and start talking about some of the actual slate stuff. And then we'll actually let's go take a look at Aaron Jones really quick. We can take a look at Aaron Jones. So if you guys don't know, I use Fantasy Life a lot for this stuff, because like I do the data pipeline for it, so I might as well use it, and it's really, really good too. I would suggest that you guys use it as well. So Aaron Jones last week, 57% of the snaps, that is above his season average. 54% of the rushing attempts, again, well above, basically 2 times as much as his season sample. Routes 52%, targets 21%, 31% targets per route run. He's a really, really good target earner. So 31% targets per route run makes a lot of sense. PPR 19 last week, 27 in week 1. I think that you ignore these weeks. He was very obviously not quite ready to go here, and then week 9 they said that they were going to finally get him super involved, and it looks like they got him super involved. So it's worth noting that AJ Dillon did see a considerable drop in his snap share and his rushing market share, so that basically went directly to Aaron Jones. At his price, Aaron Jones probably makes a lot of sense, right? And he doesn't project to be heavy chalk. He's 6,500. He's a better play than Bijan Robinson, I think. Probably him by a long shot. So, worth saying that. Let's see. What is the Kenny Pickett cheat code lineup this week that you made me play a couple weeks ago? Oh, I'd probably Washington. Probably Sam Howell. It's going to make a lot of sense. Go with Sam Howell. And we'll see that here in a sec. Let's go ahead and close up here. We are looking at the full slate overall. So Cincinnati, top overall. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, top overall median. And then we have Dallas, Detroit, Houston, more Cincinnati, more Dallas, and then some Chargers. We don't even get to a Detroit stack, which is I think going to be one of the higher owned combos until the 11th overall stack in terms of median expectation. Granted, it's right there with everything else. It's kind of the cutoff. But it's above Seattle, first off, and Seattle looks like it's going to have a lot of ownership in this spot against Washington. People just love attacking Washington. Let's sort this by ownership. We're the highest owned stacks. Cincinnati, this one makes sense. Doesn't surprise me. And then Seattle, and then Arizona. Kyler Murray coming back from injury. Going with Marquise Brown and Trey McBride. It's cheap as hell. 14.6K for a team total of 21 and what we very likely expect to be a good median. I'm going to be fine with this. But yeah, this ownership on the Seattle one is I'm not going to be about that. Let's go ahead and sort by team totals here and take a look at some of the medians. So Dallas team total is 28. Obviously, we know that. But this is a good stack. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson. This is a really good stack. It's not going to get the ownership that it deserves with such a high team total. The second one is the Cincinnati stack, which looks really good, has really high ownership. Detroit, I think, should have higher ownership than this, but if they only come in at 30%, that's probably a good stack. Seattle, obviously, still fine, a lot of ownership. And then we start coming into these team totals that, this is an expensive stack for Purdy, Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Ayuk for 19K. That's pretty pricey. But it's a 23.75 total, and the ownership is basically nothing. And there was a couple weeks where people wanted to be playing Purdy with Samuel and Ayuk, and people just don't want to do it this week. So that's really interesting. Atlanta stacks are free and have a 23 implied team total. Heineke, Drake London, and Jonnu Smith here. Jonnu Smith, not fucking Kyle Pitts, by the way. Only 14.2K here for salary and a 23 implied team total. The median is relatively low, but that's a good team total, man. We need to pay attention to that. The ownership on it is only going to be 10% owned. And then Chargers 22.75 team total, and you're spending 20K. They're the second most. They are the most expensive stack here, in terms of Herbert, Keenan Allen, and Quentin Johnson, at nearly $21,000, and the team total is about 5 points lower than Dallas, who is less expensive. So it's hard to play the Chargers this week when their team total is basically a touchdown lower than teams that are significantly underpriced and relevant to them. And then we have Baltimore, which is relatively expensive, New Orleans, which is relatively expensive, and then Arizona, which is pretty cheap. both Arizona and Pittsburgh stacks. Now, I don't think you need to go with a Pittsburgh stack, but Arizona is interesting because Kyler Murray, except the ownership is just way too high. So I'm probably not going to go there. Overall, just from looking at this stuff, like, I don't think you can play Seattle stacks. They just are too high owned. And I'm pretty sure that when we end up running the stack finder a little bit later, it's just not going to work out. Houston stacks, they're still pretty cheap. This Houston stack with Dell and Noah Brown specifically is only 16.1K, but the ownership is going to be relatively high, and I don't know if I want to chase CJ Stroud breaking the rookie passing yard record. So I'm probably not super into that, but I do really like Cincinnati, Dallas stacks, Detroit stacks. I think are great overall. Chargers stacks, if you have the money, if you're paying down at running back, I think make a lot of sense, especially considering the ownership on the running backs is generally cheaper. So, guys like Rachaad White and Joe Mixon, and we talked about Aaron Jones a second ago, these guys who are in this high 5K, low 6K range, those are going to be the guys that you need to use to get into this Chargers stack, which makes a lot of sense to me. And then San Francisco is going to have absolutely no ownership. This is a pretty good stack to go with, I think. So overall, those are the things that are most interesting. But again, ownership is kind of on the spots where we want to be on. Ownership is on Cincinnati. Like, we like that spot. Ownership should be on Dallas, I think. We like that spot. Ownership's on Detroit. We like it. Houston. We like it. The Chargers should be higher owned. They might end up being way less owned than they should be, which would make them a very good play. Currently, Keenan Allen only projects for like 5% owned, which is fucking crazy. That makes Keenan Allen like the guy. And yeah, I agree. Stroud has gotten MVP talk this week, so I feel like Houston goes over owned. Absolutely agree. I think Houston stacks are going to be through the roof owned. Like Tank Dell probably going to be touching 25 to 30% ownership. I think Dalton Schultz is going to touch 15 to 20% ownership. CJ Stroud, probably 15 to 20% ownership. Like, I think that people understand that this stack is a little bit under-owned. But that doesn't mean that you should absolutely be using them. So, now that we've talked about that, let's talk about some individual position stuff here. So, let's go to quarterbacks first. Widen this out. So, the top overall projected quarterback is Dak Prescott, 21. Ownership on him is a little bit high. Joe Burrow projects as the highest projected ownership quarterback at the moment, followed by Geno Smith. I think that CJ Stroud ownership just skyrockets. I do not see him being 5% owned. I see probably 10%. It wouldn't surprise me if Dak Prescott, who projects for 9%, ends up dropping down to like 4%, and CJ Stroud jumps up to 10%. Interesting that Lamar Jackson has no ownership. It's mostly because he hasn't been scoring touchdowns, but obviously Baltimore is still a really, really good offense and a really good defense. So him at 8K, that's interesting. Justin Herbert not getting any ownership. QB ownership is usually pretty boring. I just think that Dak Prescott is going to flip with CJ Stroud there. Let's go ahead and take a look at running backs here. Joe Mixon, the highest projected chalk, followed by Rachaad White. Rachaad White has been good, but he did run pretty hot last week, and he's up against his Tennessee defense. We have been kind of avoiding the Tennessee defense for weeks now, and usually that pays off. This is not a spot you really want to run a running back like Rachaad White into the line, 15, 16, 17 times. So that's probably going to be a pretty good fade, even if he projects pretty well. If you use him, you need to be with a lower owned stack, though, so that you can try to gain relative advantage over the field. Next highest owned is going to be Etienne and then Pollard. And then Singletary and Bijan. If people play Devin Singletary again, they just need to stop playing DFS. Like, Devin Singletary, Houston's running backs don't do anything. Like, their offense is terrible from a rushing standpoint. The only way that they can really be good is if CJ Stroud goes insane. Don't play Devin Singletary. It doesn't matter what his price is. The spot is not necessarily all that great either. It's not like the defense that they're facing is the worst defense in the world. They're facing Cincinnati. It's not like they're facing the Giants. It's not like they're facing the Jets. This isn't a spot where they're huge home favorites. Like, Devin Singletary is not the spot that you want to be. All of that being said, if Devin Singletary drops down to like 5% ownership, like we rerun the trending numbers in the morning and we see that he's trending super far down, maybe you can use him as a flyer, but no. Don't fucking touch Devin Singletary. Just terrible, terrible idea. Christian McCaffrey, 14% owned. So overall, like we like this chalk. There's not really anybody who projects super bad here. Devin Singletary, I'm not going to touch at 17% owned, but like overall, chalk looks fine at running back. Not really trying to go out of my way to avoid any of that. Let's go ahead and take a look at wide receivers. Tank Dell projects for the highest ownership. This is going to be 30% by tomorrow. Tyler Lockett, going to be 20-25%. Marquise Brown, that'll make sense. Like, all of these guys make sense as chalk. I literally can't find anybody that I think is a terrible play in this list. Maybe Jordan Addison. I'm probably not using Jordan Addison with Joshua Dobbs up against New Orleans defense. That's probably a really bad idea. But Deontay Johnson gets great volume and caught a touchdown last week. First touchdown with Kenny Pickett, I believe. DeAndre Hopkins has good, apparently, chemistry with fucking banana boy Will Levis. Terry McLaurin looks fine, like fine play. I'm totally fine with basically all this chalk. Note that CeeDee Lamb only projects for about 11% owned, and when we sort by median, like Keenan Allen only projects for 5% ownership. That's nuts. That is crazy. We should be playing Keenan Allen this week. We should be basically finding any way to play Keenan Allen. Amon-Ra St. Brown projects for 15% owned for $500 less on the other side of that game in the same projection. We should be playing Keenan Allen. Jamar Chase projects for 20% ownership he projects for 5 times as much ownership for a projection difference of 1.5 fantasy points and basically the same price. We should be playing Keenan Allen. That's just a really, really good spot. Let's see. Other wide receivers that look under-owned. Deebo Samuel looks way under-owned, 4% owned. Mark Cooper looks way under-owned, 4% owned. There's a lot of guys who look like we should be on them when the field is not. Oh, wait. Shit. Forgot to do tight ends. Tight ends, most important part. Zoom this out. Let's take a look at some ownership. Highest ownership looks like Trey McBride. How was Trey McBride last week? How was his usage? I actually did not pay attention to that. I don't think that it matters because last week they were throwing the game anyway. 25% targets per route run, 28% of target. So he was fine. But again, 5 fantasy points. Like that's more in line with what his expected fantasy points should be. That said, Kyler Murray should be a big boost to anyone in that offense. So Trey McBride probably fine at 3,500. I don't know if I want to play him as heavy chalk, but probably fine. And then TJ Hawkinson and then Jake Ferguson. Let's see, sort by median here. Dalton Schultz looks way under-owned. If he's not going to be a part of those Houston stacks, he should be. George Kittle, way under-owned. Mark Andrews, way under-owned. Just a couple guys. The more expensive ones really are looking like they're going to be under-owned here. So next up, we're going to go into the Stack Finder. For those of you who do not know what the Stack Finder does, it basically takes all of the stacks that we saw in the first part of this breakdown of the slate and says only show us the ones that have a projection that is good enough for the ownership that we're paying for them. Let's see. Questions. Chargers never produced for me ever. Keenan Allen produces. Motherfucker has like a 35-point ceiling. Probably going to get like 16 targets tomorrow. Stroud has got an MVP talk. We talked about that. Noah Brown is interesting. Noah Brown, he was popping in the models and in the sims last week, and I didn't listen, and it probably cost me a lot of money. What was his usage like last week? Because if he's on the upswing, 73% of the routes, 16% of the targets, those are in line with his season averages for the most part. 8 out of 11 is crazy. Hold on. Hold, please. Noah Brown's expected fantasy points is 9.43. That's about in line with what he has been doing. It's a little bit behind Dalton Schultz, a little bit behind Tank Dell. He's overall like a good play, but he might end up having a lot more ownership than he should, especially because his price didn't jump up. So that's a little bit worrisome. So if someone posts a lineup in the Discord with Singletary, I get to ban them. You get to put them in timeout, for sure. How about Thomas getting arrested? Do we see a Shaheed upside? I mean, yeah, if Thomas is... Well, actually, no. I don't think that Shaheed plays the same stuff that Michael Thomas does. I can actually go check that, but I don't think that I can check it on stream. It'll take me a little while to find, but I don't think that that target tree is mixed. I think we likely see the guy behind him... See, I mean, I can go check here really quick. Real insane. So, yeah, I mean, Shaheed is still playing 64% of the snaps. I think there would probably be Keith Kirkwood that would come up rather than Shaheed getting a significant boost in snaps. And, like, Shaheed does not get that many targets, man. He's very boom or bust. He had 24 fantasy points on 10% of the targets in week 8, 21% on 19% of the targets in week 1, 18 on 11% of the targets in week 6. Like, it's just because his ADOT is crazy. I don't necessarily think that Michael Thomas has a big effect on Rashid Shaheed, but maybe. I don't know. I need to dig in. I need to see if those snaps correlate at all. But that's a good question. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into the stack finder. Okay, so we're going to go close up screen here. So the ones that we were most interested in, let's go ahead and go back to the range of outcomes and just kind of look at what the stacks were. I think that it's pretty spread out. Cincinnati, Dallas, Detroit, Houston, Chargers, San Francisco. So the ones that mostly stick out here are going to be Cincinnati, Dallas, and Detroit and Houston. Chargers and San Francisco kind of fall off a little bit. But let's see what QB plus 2 looks like. Let's just jump this up to 40K. Nothing is going to cost that much, but whatever. Go ahead and run this. All right. Wait, I have not reset this. I should reset it. Philadelphia is not a part of it. All right. So, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Tyler Boyd. That's the top overall. Cost 20K. Ownership's 47. So then we have Dallas, then Detroit, and then Dallas, and then a lot of Chargers. So if you notice here, we have no Houston at all. We end up with a lot of Chargers, right? We still have Cincinnati, we still have Dallas, we still have Detroit, and then we have Chargers. We don't get San Francisco. San Francisco is higher owned than Charger stacks. So it's mostly, we really like Charger stacks here, man. Well underowned for basically every single variation of the Charger stack. Dallas does have 2 stacks that are underowned, both CeeDee Lamb with Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb with Brandon Cooks. Both of those are underowned or appropriately owned based on their projection. The only Cincinnati stack that you can play is really the best one, and that's mostly just because it's the best one. And then the only Detroit stack that you're really playing is Goff, Brown, and Laporta, the best one overall. As you go down, you can play some Cleveland stacks, you can play some Green Bay stacks, fucking barf. New Orleans stacks, I think that one's going to make sense, especially if Michael Thomas is out. Let's go ahead and go QB plus 1 and see what we get here. Yeah, run. So you got Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, and then we have a Dallas stack with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, then a Charger stack with Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. And then we have to drop way down in projection. We lose another 7 points in projection to get to a Houston stack with just CJ Stroud and Dalton Schultz. And then there's Brock Purdy and Deebo Samuel, and then we start really running into some projections that are really low. Stroud plus Robert Woods is only a projection of 27. We end up into this Jordan Love and Dontavian Wicks, Dobbs, Reed bullshit. Like, we don't really want to play anything here that projects for just 25 fantasy points. Really, really low. Even if the ownership is really low. Like, you can play these. You can do these as one-offs. There's a fucking Derek Carr plus Taysom Hill. How fucking stupid is that? Can you imagine? Can you imagine taking down $1 million with your Derek Carr, Taysom Hill mini stack? Imagine if both of them threw 2 touchdowns to completely different wide receivers,
and one of them was a Derek Carr to Taysom Hill touchdown pass. That's some fucked up shit right there. That's the worst thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. In 10 years playing DFS, that is the worst shit that I've ever heard. Awful. Gonna go throw up in the bathroom. Interesting, we didn't get any Washington stacks in QB plus 2. I was thinking they would be low enough owned that we would end up getting them, but we really don't. We end up getting a lot of Chargers. Oh yeah, you guys can't see that because I'm an asshole. We end up getting a lot of Chargers. We end up getting some Dallas. We end up getting the best Cincinnati and Detroit stacks. But that's pretty much it, and then your ownership falls off a cliff. So based on that stuff, it seems like we're mostly into Cincinnati and Detroit, best stacks. Dallas, which we can do because people aren't stacking them enough. And then Charger stacks. Charger stacks are going to be probably the best stacks you can make. You can make any variation of your Charger stack, and it's mostly just oriented around Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. People, I think, James AG said that he's pretty much given up on the Chargers because they don't produce, and it's like a lot of people have. But if you go with any combination of Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, and Donald Parham, or with Gerald Everett, or, the only stack that you don't get here for the Chargers is with Quentin Johnson, who projects to be overowned. But you can go with pretty much any other combo, and it's going to be totally fine. You can fit anything that you want around them. You can go Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Jared Everett, and then just optimize for ownership around it. And, you'll be fine. The stacks that we did not get in the stack finder were Houston and Washington. Those are kind of the two stacks that I was really interested in seeing. Houston makes sense. I think it's going to be way overowned. I mean, that they don't even show up here at what we think is probably conservative ownership projections on them. So with the actual ownership projections that I think we're going to see tomorrow, which I imagine are going to be 25-30% higher than what we're seeing, going to be way overowned. So that one's really, really interesting. And then I thought that we'd see some San Francisco. I thought that we'd see some Washington, but we don't. We end up seeing a lot of Chargers, Dallas, and Detroit, and Cincinnati. So that's kind of your player pool in terms of stacks. Cincinnati, Dallas, Detroit, Chargers. And then I think that you can probably, I still think you can probably do a Washington stack. You can probably do a Houston stack if you get away from a lot of the other chalk. If you get way different at running back, then I think you can do a Houston stack. If you get, different at tight end probably, or tight end and defense, you can probably end up being fine with Washington stacks. The other piece of this that is really important is how owned is the Cowboys defense going to be? Because if the Cowboys defense is going to be giga owned, you can kind of play any stack and just cross them out of your player pool and you'll be fine. Because the ownership is, if the Dallas defense gets to 30-35% owned, which I could see that happening. I know that they're expensive, but this is a spot where everybody knows how bad the Giants are. Everybody's memeing on this Tommy DeVito kid like he's a joke on Twitter right now. I could see the Dallas defense getting way up there in ownership. If the Dallas defense ends up being really, really popular and really highly owned, you could probably just end up getting off of them and playing Houston or Washington or whatever stack, really. And then just getting off of one more piece of chalk, maybe Joe Mixon or Rachaad White, and that's all that you would have to do. You can still play these stacks that are relatively overowned, so long as you're smart about the way that you're handling the chalk around them. So let's go ahead and move on to this last piece of things, where let's talk a little bit about ownership here. This is projected for DraftKings ownership. FanDuel, I do obviously have on the site, but I don't talk about it on stream because I fucking don't like FanDuel. That's plain and simple. So overall ownership, Joe Mixon, highest projected ownership on any player on the slate so far. Him and Rachaad White. I'm actually surprised by the Rachaad White ownership. I think that does come down, especially against Tennessee defense. But if that holds 23% ownership, his utilization is the 5th best in the league. His expected PPR points is pretty strong. Fine play. Joe Mixon, utilization is 7th best in the league. Expected PPR is 15.6. Totally fine. Both those guys are relatively underpriced for their roles. Tyler Lockett looks probably over-owned, but it is the Washington defense, right? And Vegas is projecting Seattle to be about half touchdown better than their season averages. So I could see Tyler Lockett being worth that if you expected his expected PPR points to go up about 3 points for an extra half a touchdown or whatever. Then that's totally fine. You know, I can buy that. He's fine. Marquise Brown, people are making a bet on Kyler Murray being much better than what they've had, and I think that's a fine bet. In fact, I think that Marquise Brown is a very good play, and I think that Arizona stacks make a lot of sense. It's kind of a risky proposition. It's not a spot that you would like to spend ownership on, but I think that if you buy into that, I think that's fine with that. Jamar Chase, great chalk. Should get 19 targets tomorrow or whatever. Travis Etienne, fine. Again, all that stuff. The one that sticks out like a sore fucking thumb is Devin Singletary. Expected PPR points of just 7. Projected to be 17% owned. Don't play Devin Singletary. Cardinals defense projects to be highly owned. I don't know why. It's not like, I don't know, man. Like I don't want to pay for that. I know they're 2,500, and I know that it's Atlanta, but Atlanta hasn't been absolutely terrible. Trey McBride ownership makes a lot of sense. Again, same thing as Marquise Brown. But overall, when we look at this, you know, the top 20 or so pieces of ownership, I think it makes sense. You know, you can avoid Devin Singletary. You can avoid Cardinals defense for the most part. These guys, it kind of gets a little bit thin, right? The utilization isn't that great. The expected PPR points not that hot. TJ Hawkinson, I think, is probably the best chalk out of these guys. But maybe you don't love Terry McLaurin. Maybe you don't love DeAndre Hopkins. I'm fine with that if you want to get away from those guys. And then, you know, as we move down the list, Tyler Boyd makes sense. A lot of this chalk, I mean, it makes sense. Like, this is a week where the chalk, I think, last week, the chalk made a lot of sense as well. This week, I think that, again, you just take Devin Singletary out of your player pool. There's no reason to use him if he's going to be really chalky. And then you can just be smart about the stacks that you're using and just optimize for ownership around them if you feel like the chalk is good, like I do. If you're stacking Cincinnati, obviously you just keep Joe Mixon out of your stack, and that's direct leverage against him. You can stack Tampa Bay, get direct leverage against Rachaad White. That's nice and easy to do. You can use, I don't know, you can even get away from certain chalk on like Travis Etienne, right? Like you can stack Jacksonville. Like there's a lot of good stacks you can use against these running backs if you want to, but you don't have to. I think that the chalk is totally fine. As far as trending ownership, take a look at this too. Highest trending ownership is Devin Singletary. Was projected for 2% ownership on Thursday. When I ran it today, this will be updated. You can find it on the site under research tools anyway, but currently projected for 17% ownership. Tyler Boyd, this one makes sense. Terry McLaurin got a lot of steam. Metcalf got a lot of steam. Noah Brown, like I said, Noah Brown I expect to be about 20% owned. He's just too cheap. People are going to catch on to it. It's not like he's going to be a secret. So the guys who are the lowest trending here, trending down, going to be Rondell Moore, projecting for significantly less ownership. Marquise Brown actually is trending down a little bit. Brian Robinson is trending down a little bit. He's probably an interesting play at 5,400. Don't hate that, especially when Rachaad White at basically the same price is going to be relatively highly owned, and he's right there as well. Christian McCaffrey trending down. Some interesting trends here. So overall, let's close things up here. First off, was anyone else anticipating James getting ready to make a case for New York Giants? Absolutely fucking not. This Tommy DeVito guy lives with his parents. He's a fucking beta cuck, man. I'm not touching that. I don't need to subject myself to that kind of stuff, especially because I'm playing with like normal volume tomorrow. After the NHL hit, I'm like, yeah, let's fucking throw some money in NFL. Closing thoughts. Stacks are Cincinnati, Dallas, Detroit, and the Chargers. Those are the main four. Those are the ones we're most interested in. The highest owned stacks that we are okay with playing are going to be Houston and Arizona. Just be reticent of eating a lot of ownership around running back. You know, if you play an Arizona stack or a Houston stack, you're probably not using Joe Mixon and Rachaad White. But Joe Mixon and Rachaad White are totally fine if you're using a Charger stack, right? One player that I didn't talk about that I think is worth mentioning here is Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara still has, I guess this isn't like a total like finish up here, but we're going to sort by expected fantasy points, and I'm going to show you this. Alvin Kamara still has the highest expected fantasy points of any player on the slate, right? 23.58. He's not going to be highly owned. especially after the relative dud last week. But he's a really, really good play at 6% ownership. Again, like Lamar Jackson has a really good projection. Let's take running backs out or quarterbacks out of this and defenses. Let's just look at running back, tight end, wide receiver. Alvin Kamara, low owned. Saquon Barkley, low owned. Keenan Allen, low owned. David Montgomery, low owned. Jamar Gibbs, low owned. Like a lot of these guys who have these expected fantasy points that are really, really high and these really good usages are going to be under owned. And basically what that tells us is like, one, the groupthink is really, really strong at this point in the season. People think that they know what is happening, so they're getting on more of the high-owned plays, and the high-owned plays then become exponentially higher. But, like, it also just shows us that people are kind of getting tunnel vision. People would rather play, Alvin, or people would rather play Christian McCaffrey. People would rather play Travis Etienne. People would rather play some of these other guys who are expensive rather than Alvin Kamara. Like Jamar Chase, people are playing over him. People are playing Amon-Ra St. Brown at the same price. People are playing CeeDee Lamb. All these guys are higher owned than Alvin Kamara, but Alvin Kamara has the highest expected fantasy points in the league. His receiving stuff is just so good. So having Alvin Kamara, I think, instantly differentiates you and puts you in a spot to have a really, really high upside lineup, especially if you're paying down for something like a Washington stack or a Houston stack. Like, if you do a Houston stack, you should just lock in Alvin Kamara. He's probably the best play on the slate with a chalky Houston stack. Instantly puts you in a position to pass a large swath of the field because he's only going to be like 10% owned at most. So that's a really, really good spot. I just wanted to call him out really quick. Spots that we really kind of want to avoid. I think the biggest spot is just Devin Singletary. And then the second biggest spot is Bijan Robinson. Don't play either one of these guys. Let people keep paying rake on Bijan Robinson. At this point, like I said at the beginning of the stream, Bijan Robinson is appropriately priced. He's not underpriced. He is appropriately priced. So his appropriate ownership should be like 5-10% owned. It shouldn't be 17 to 20% owned. It's too high. So don't play him. As far as other guys that are looking to be really highly owned, probably the only other one that I'm really just not interested in playing is going to be, somebody like Jordan Addison. I don't really love Jordan Addison. I don't really love Trey McBride as a one-off. I'm fine with him in stacks, but I wouldn't play Trey McBride as a one-off. Same with Marquise Brown. Like, Marquise Brown is going to be too highly owned to play as a one-off, but as part of a stack, he's fine. I think overall the moral of the story for this week is you can get different with your stacks, and it's really easy, so you should just do that. But if you're going to play some of these high-owned players, you need to play them in a stack. Just be really, really cognizant of the stacks that you're putting together. I think that's important. And then the last thing that I'll say this week is if the Dallas Cowboys defense is going to be really highly owned, which I think they're going to get steamed up tomorrow, just take them out of your player pool. This is a really, really good week to be different at defense and play some weird defenses because there's a lot of like kind of weird chalk. And the ownership is so spread out and there's so many, like, there's still a lot of bad quarterbacks that are playing this week, right? The team totals are not especially high. I think it makes a lot of sense to be different on defense. However, if the Dallas Cowboys defense is only going to be like 10% owned, you should just fucking play the Dallas Cowboys defense. Like, that's the kicker. Dallas Cowboys defense is the best play on the slate if they're low owned. All of Dallas is the best play on the slate if they're low owned. So be reticent of that tomorrow. Be careful with it in terms of the ownership. And if there are low owned Dallas plays, you should play them. Highest team total on the slate, worst opponent, figure it out. Let's see, closing things out. New plan, 2 passing touchdowns for each Carr and Hill. 2 of those go to Kamara. Wonderful stack to tilt. That sounds fucking hilarious. Yeah, like, that needs to be in the Millie Maker. We have to have at least one from this stream, one lineup of Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, and Taysom Hill as a stack. That is the grossest shit that could ever win the Millie Maker. And I need it to happen. Like, I need it to happen tomorrow. It'd be the funniest thing on the planet. Any consideration for Jalen Warren at 5K? They just keep using Najee Harris, man. Like, yeah, and models will probably kick him out there. He was ending up in optimals last week, and I was fine with that. He'll probably be in optimals this week as well. He's nothing super exciting, but at low ownership, he does have a good receiving role. And as far as the prices on running backs this week, you could do worse. He's a better play than Devin Singletary, probably. But yeah, anyway, that's going to do it. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is James Cool. I'm the owner of Paydirt, PaydirtDFS.com. If you have not checked out the site, I really think that you should. There have been a lot of really, really good improvements that I've made overall and that I have brought in to make. The NBA product has been fantastic. The NHL product has been fantastic. We cover all these sports except for MMA. I'm not covering MMA right now, but that'll be back up soon. If you want to grab a subscription, you can. There are a lot of different options. We have different monthly options. We have a couple of yearly options. Then we have a weekly and a daily pass. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for the support. And don't forget to catch the article tomorrow, the thoughts and notes that I put out about an hour and a half before the slate starts. If you guys have any questions, you can reach out to me in the Discord. It is free to join. And I appreciate all the support. I hope you all have a great night, and I will talk to you tomorrow.